Hi, and welcome to the Oikos Family Podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, and today I'm going to share with you the next chapter from Roses and Thorns. This one is called, the title of this chapter is The Lost Children. It's a sweet story about a couple of little children going off berry picking, but the importance of the story is actually about the importance of obedience. And there's also a lesson from God's great own heart, as the little boy in the story says. It's very sweet. He says, but God's great own heart. I like the way he puts that. So basically it's a story about the importance of being obedient and then also learning a lesson from God's great own heart. So, as I have said in the past, without further ado, here is the story for you today, The Lost Children from Roses and Thorns.
Chapter 5 The Lost Children. William and Mary asked their aunt to read them one more story about roses and thorns before they had to go to bed. Aunt Eleanor got out another book and found the following story in it. It's called The Lost Children. The students in Miss Merritt's school were going to have a picnic. For 3 days before the picnic, everyone was very busy asking questions and making suggestions to prepare for it. Margaret Graham excitedly hurried home after school. She was a tall, energetic 14-year-old girl. Her mother was a widow who made a living by taking in washing. Margaret and her brother Ali were the only children. The busy summer work began about 2 weeks before the school term ended. Mrs. Graham managed to look after the extra work by herself until Margaret was out of school for the summer. That way, Margaret could remain in school until the end of the term. School children had made plans to hold the picnic on an island in the river where people often went on outings. Mrs. Graham was by the bubbling brook in her garden, leaning over her washtub, when Margaret came home from school. "Oh, Mother," she began eagerly, "the school picnic is tomorrow. May I look for some berries? Sandy Merrill says there are plenty on the north side of the hill." "Yes, you may go if you take Ali with you. It is hard for me to work and watch him too," her mother said with a sigh. Ali was a smart little 4-year-old boy. He had been throwing pebbles into the brook. When he heard his mother, he ran up to Margaret and cried, "Oh yes, take me." Margaret went to the house and returned with a large tin pail and Ali's hat. Ali wanted to carry the pail himself. "Go get the small mug and give it to him," his mother said. "That is all he'll be able to carry when he gets tired. Don't go over the mountain, because Ali is not old enough to walk that far. Besides, it's already past 4 o'clock. Margaret and Ali left and quickly walked along the fields. They climbed over the fence and entered the woods. The shade of the huge trees was pleasant after the hot sun in the meadow they had just crossed. They walked on, picking berries from either side. Sandy Merrill's report that berries were plentiful was not true, however. The berries barely covered the bottom of the large pail, and the tin mug wasn't getting heavy either. Ali ran on ahead a little way. He suddenly turned on his heels, screaming, "A wolf! A wolf!" and ran towards his sister. The little boy fell flat on the ground. A huge black animal bounded toward him. For an instant, Margaret stood paralyzed with terror. The bushes crackled, and a cheerful voice shouted, "Here, Rollo! Here, boy!" Margaret came to her senses again, and saw that the wolf was really Colonel Clemshire's black Newfoundland dog. The colonel himself was coming toward her carrying a gun in his hand. The colonel lifted the frightened little boy off the ground. Ali stood up, feeling very foolish. Margaret picked up the mug which had fallen from Ali's hand. They all had a good laugh over Ali's wolf. "You won't find many berries here," said Colonel Clemshire. "Over by Muddy Run there are plenty, but it is too late for you to go there tonight. Goodbye now," he called. After whistling to his dog, he walked on toward the village. Margaret and Allie set out once again, but found only a few tiny berries. "Maggie, let's go to Muddy Run," said the child. "My cup isn't even half full." Margaret had been thinking the same thought. She hurriedly answered, "You know the Colonel said it was too far for us to go tonight." "Oh, Maggie, I can walk all the way," said Allie. "You do want a lot of berries for the party, don't you?" "Mother did not tell us not to go to Muddy Run," she reasoned to herself. "She only said not to go over the mountain." In her heart she knew that her mother had meant not to go far. Ignoring her conscience, she took Allie's hand and turned, walking across the woods. Although the stony ground was hard for Allie's small feet to walk on, he trotted on bravely. Now and then he was comforted by seeing the big berries which his sister dropped carefully into his mug. The trail seemed very long. After a while, Allie lost courage. They could not hear the brook yet, and he was beginning to feel tired and hungry. Soon the hill began to slope away. Margaret hurried on when she saw the opening in the trees beyond, where the stream ran through. They reached the brook and turned up its banks. Thick bushes grew between the trees on the hilly sides of the stream. There were berries everywhere, and Allie soon filled his cup. Both soon forgot how tired they were. Margaret pressed on. She was so busy daydreaming about the picnic and the berries, she didn't notice the darkness approaching. They turned away from the brook and followed a stretch of bushes that grew up the mountainside. Allie began to feel weary again, and he grew fretful. He had eaten as many berries as he wanted, and his mug was getting heavy. "Maggie, let's go home. I'm tired," he whimpered twice before she heard him. Satisfied that her pail was nearly full, she took his hand and turned around. Then she realized that she had lost the path. They had strayed too far from the brook to be guided by it. She said nothing about her fears, but hurried on, dragging the tired, sore-footed child. He upset her even more when he started to cry. "Be quiet, Allie. We're going home," she said impatiently. Cheered by the idea of home, the child stopped crying and followed her. The shadows grew darker and darker as they trudged on, scared and tired. Margaret sat down and took Allie in her arms. "Oh, Maggie," wept the frightened child. "Do you think the robins will come and cover us with leaves?" Too breathless to answer, she just hugged him closer. The stories she had heard of a panther seen on the mountain came to her mind. She knew that bears might be near. Every rustling branch increased her terror. She tried to pray. The thought of her disobedience stopped her. She couldn't deceive herself now. She knew she had been wrong and could no longer excuse it. "Maggie, don't you think God will take care of us?" whispered the child. "Mother says he will." "Yes, he will take care of you, Allie. I know I don't deserve it." "Oh, yes, he will, Maggie. He's real good," said the little fellow, while he nestled up to her. "I've been so wicked," she went on. With tears in her eyes, she told her brother how terribly wrong she had been. Trembling even more as the wind rushed through the trees, she said, "Mother told me not to go over the mountain. I came here anyway. Now we're lost, and God won't let me go home again." "Yes, he will," persisted the little child. "Mother says he will, if you ask him." "But I feel wicked," cried Margaret. "He's good," said the child again. "Mother says that God don't love me because I'm good. Even if I'm not good, He loves me out of his own great heart." The powerful words of the child moved his sister. God loves me out of his own great heart. The last Sunday school lesson had been, "While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." "I see it all now," Margaret said to herself. "While we were yet sinners. Miss Hall tried to make me understand, but I couldn't see it until now." The child fell asleep at Margaret's feet. The wind rushed through the trees as it had before. It was very lonely, but Margaret knew God was there. All fear had left her. Now she could pray. Suddenly, a light flashed through the trees. Voices seemed to spring from every part of the forest. Margaret hardly had time to jump to her feet before Rollo came bounding out towards the children. With a joyful bark, the dog licked Allie's face. Margaret hardly knew how she was led out of the woods, or how she answered the hundreds of questions. Allie was picked up in strong arms, and he never awoke until he was in his own bed. Mother was bending over him comfortingly. Colonel Clemshire followed them back to their home, amid the heartfelt thanks of the tearful group. He said that since he was the cause of the children's wandering, it was only right for him to direct the search party to find them. "I knew where to look for them," he said. "That suggestion of mine was too much temptation." The pail of berries was overturned in the confusion, but there were enough left for Mrs. Graham to bake a large pie. When Margaret went to the school picnic the next day, she felt happy and very thankful. In fact, she was probably the happiest person there. Margaret had learned a great lesson that night in the forest, alone with God.